My name's Ethan Reynolds, 32, technically the co-owner of Reynolds Construction with my 40% stake. Most people call me the black sheep of the family, though I prefer the term forward thinker. 3 days ago, while inspecting a job site, I got a voicemail from my mother. "You're out of the family business. Expect a call from our lawyer." I didn't argue. Just texted back. Understood. Then I made one phone call that changed everything. If you're watching this, stick around to see what 72 missed calls looks like when you stand your ground. Before I dive into this wild ride, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to see more stories about families, business, and knowing when to walk away. Reynolds Construction wasn't always the regional powerhouse it is today. My grandfather Gerald started it with nothing but a pickup truck, a toolbox, and a reputation for honest work back in 1963. He built houses around Portland one at a time, gaining loyal customers through word of mouth. Dad used to tell me stories about riding in Grandpa's truck as a boy, handing him nails and learning the difference between pine and oak before he could spell either word. When my father Robert took over in the late 80s, he had bigger dreams. He'd studied business management while working for Grandpa, and saw potential for expansion. Under Dad's leadership, Reynolds Construction grew from residential homes to commercial properties. By the time I was 10, we were building strip malls, office buildings, and eventually, small corporate headquarters. Dad had a talent for networking and securing contracts that Grandpa never had. I grew up on construction sites. My older brother Jason was the golden child, 4 years my senior, and seemingly born with a blueprint in one hand and a calculator in the other. Mom, Margaret Reynolds, had been Dad's bookkeeper before they married, and she brought financial discipline to the company's expansion. The family dynamic was always clear: Jason would inherit the mantle, Mom would manage the books, and I was expected to find my place somewhere in the hierarchy. Dad always said I had an artist's eye, which wasn't exactly a compliment in our family of builders. While Jason memorized material costs and labor rates, I was redesigning floor plans and researching innovative building materials. I left for college against my mother's wishes. She thought I should learn the business from the ground up like Jason had. Instead, I got dual degrees in architecture and environmental engineering. When I returned with ideas about sustainable building practices and eco-friendly designs, Mom dismissed them as expensive fads. Dad, though, saw potential. He'd developed heart problems by then, and while he didn't say it directly, I think he knew his time was limited. Against Mom's objections, he restructured the company before his death, leaving me a 40% stake, Jason 45%, and Mom 15%. "The company needs both vision and stability," he told us during what would be our last family meeting. "Jason will keep us profitable, and Ethan will keep us relevant." Mom never forgave him for that decision. After Dad passed 5 years ago, she effectively formed a voting bloc with Jason, controlling 60% of the company. On paper, I was leadership. In practice, I was constantly overruled. The conflicts were predictable but still painful. I pushed for LEED certification on our projects. They cited the costs. I suggested investing in prefabrication technology to reduce waste and labor time. They worried about the initial investment. I advocated for solar integration in our commercial buildings. They claimed our clients wouldn't pay the premium. The irony was that when we did implement my ideas, usually when a specific client requested them, those projects succeeded spectacularly. Last year, I led a team on an eco-friendly corporate campus for a tech startup that won regional awards and generated the most profit margin of any project in company history. Articles were written. My picture appeared in the Portland Business Journal. Clients started asking for the Reynolds who did the Horizon project. Mom hated it. At board meetings, she'd introduce Jason as our CO, and me as our architect, despite my equal executive standing. Employees started coming to me directly with ideas and concerns, bypassing the traditional chain of command. Younger clients specifically requested meetings with me rather than Jason. The tensions escalated over the past 6 months. What had been professional disagreements became personal attacks. Mom started excluding me from client meetings. Jason began overriding my project decisions without consultation. I was finding out about major company moves from employees rather than leadership briefings. Still, I persevered. Reynolds Construction was my birthright too, and Dad had believed in me enough to ensure I had a significant stake. I thought we could work through it. Family businesses have conflicts, but blood is thicker than water, right? I couldn't have been. Last Tuesday began like any other workday. I arrived at the Greenfield project, an eco-friendly apartment complex that I'd fought tooth and nail to secure for Reynolds Construction. After months of resistance from Mom and Jason, they'd finally relented when the client made it clear they'd only work with us if I was leading the project. The final inspections were happening that day, and everything was going perfectly. Mr. Reynolds, the energy efficiency rating. I felt a surge of pride as we walked through the nearly complete building. The passive solar design, the recycled materials, the water reclamation system, it all worked exactly as I had designed it. This was the future of construction, and we were on the cutting edge. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder: Executive Strategy Meeting, 1 p.m. I'd prepared a comprehensive presentation about expanding our eco-friendly building services, complete with projections showing potential profit increases of 20% over 3 years. The Greenfield project would be Exhibit A. When I arrived at the office, something felt off. Jason sat at the head of the table, technically my father's old position, though we'd never formally reassigned it. Mom sat to his right, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed some document. 3 other senior managers were present, all looking uncomfortable. "Sorry I'm late," I said, setting up my laptop. "Final walkthrough at Greenfield took longer than expected. Great news though, we're exceeding all efficiency projections." Mom didn't look up. "We've already started. Take a seat." I noticed my usual chair had been removed. The only empty seat was at the far end of the table. For the next hour, I watched as they systematically dismantled my department. The sustainability initiative I'd been building for 2 years was being restructured. My team members were being reassigned to traditional projects. The budget for green building research was being temporarily reallocated to conventional construction. "The market just isn't there yet," Jason explained, not meeting my eyes. "We need to focus on proven revenue streams." When I tried to present my counterarguments and the success metrics from Greenfield, Mom cut me off. "The decision has been made, Ethan. You voted without me? When?" "Emergency executive session yesterday evening." "Which I wasn't informed about." "You were at the job site. We couldn't wait." I looked around the table. No one would meet my gaze except Mom, whose eyes held a challenge. This wasn't business. This was personal. The meeting ended with me essentially being stripped of all meaningful authority. My projects would continue under different management. My team would report to Jason's deputies. My budget was gone. I left without another word, drove to a nearby park, and sat on a bench trying to process what had just happened. That's when my phone rang with Mom's number. I let it go to voicemail, still too angry to speak with her. A minute later, the notification appeared. I'll never forget her exact words. "Ethan, the board has decided your position is no longer necessary given the company's strategic direction. You're out of the family business, effective immediately. You'll retain your shares as a silent investor, but your employment is terminated. Security will escort you to clear your office tomorrow morning. Expect a call from our lawyer regarding the separation agreement. This is non-negotiable." I played it 3 times, letting each word sink in. Fired from my own company. The company my grandfather built, my father grew, and I was helping to evolve. The company where I owned 40% of the shares. Something cold and clear settled over me. I texted back one word. Understood. Then I called my friend Tyler, who had a law degree and worked in corporate acquisitions. "I need your advice," I said. "And I need you to keep this absolutely confidential." That night, I pulled out the company bylaws and shareholder agreement that Dad had created before he died. I'd studied them before, but now I was looking with new eyes. Around 2 a.m., fueled by coffee and righteous anger, I found what I was looking for, a clause that Dad had specifically included, probably foreseeing this exact scenario. In the event that any shareholder who is also an employee is terminated without due process as outlined in Appendix C, said shareholder retains the right to sell their shares to any qualified buyer without first offering them to existing shareholders. Normally, if I wanted to sell my shares, I'd have to offer them to Mom and Jason first. But they'd violated the termination procedures by not giving proper notice, documentation of performance issues, or opportunity for remediation. I texted Tyler. Found what we need. Meeting tomorrow? His response came immediately. My office 8 a.m. Bring all documentation. As I finally fell asleep around 4 a.m., I realized I wasn't sad or even particularly angry anymore. I was resolved. They'd made their choice, and now I would make mine. I met Tyler at his downtown office before normal business hours. The early morning light cast long shadows across his desk as I spread out the company documents. They really screwed up, Tyler said, tapping the bylaw clause I'd found. This is airtight. You can sell to whoever you want. Who would want to buy into this mess? I asked. Are you kidding? Reynolds Construction is a major regional player. 40% of that would be very attractive to the right buyer. He leaned back in his chair. The question is, do you really want to do this? It's your family, Ethan. I thought about years of being undermined, my ideas dismissed until they proved profitable, and then being taken credit for by others. I thought about being fired from my own family's company via voicemail. They stopped treating me like family a long time ago, I said. I'm just making it official. Tyler nodded. Then let's start making calls. First, you need a valuation. By noon, I was sitting across from Andrea Hoffman, a financial analyst specializing in construction and real estate companies. She'd worked with Tyler on numerous acquisitions and came highly recommended. Based on your recent projects, assets, contracts, and market position, she said after reviewing the confidential financial documents I'd provided, a 40% stake in Reynolds Construction should be valued between $18 and $22 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. I knew the company was successful, but hearing the actual figure made it real. That's assuming all the financials you've provided are accurate, she cautioned. And that there are no hidden liabilities. They're accurate, I assured her. I may have been sidelined, but I still had access to all the financial systems until yesterday. Andrea made a list of potential buyers' competitors who might want to enter our market, investment groups looking for established businesses, even some former clients who had investment arms. But one name caught my attention: Westfield Developers. Westfield was our biggest competitor in the Pacific Northwest. They'd been trying to break into the Portland market for years but couldn't match our local connections and reputation. They had also been early adopters of green building technologies, something I'd pointed out repeatedly in board meetings. Richard Parker is their CEO, I said. I've met him at industry conferences. He's always been impressed by my sustainability initiatives. That could be your in, Tyler advised. But be careful. Once you start these conversations, there's no turning back. I called Richard that afternoon from Tyler's office. To my surprise, he picked up directly. Ethan Reynolds, he said warmly. I was just reading about your Greenfield project. Impressive work. Thank you, Richard. I'm actually calling to discuss a potential business opportunity. A confidential one. There was a pause. I'm listening. I'd prefer to meet in person. Are you available tomorrow? For this kind of call? I can be in Portland by noon. We agreed to meet at a private dining room in a downtown restaurant, neutral territory away from prying eyes. That evening, I consulted with Sarah Williams, an attorney Tyler recommended who specialized in corporate sales. She reviewed the shareholder agreement and confirmed Tyler's assessment. "You're within your rights to sell," she said. "But we need to move quickly, before they realize their mistake and try to correct it." I spent that night in a strange emotional state, part grief, part excitement, part fear. Was I really going to sever ties with my family business? The business that had defined my identity for my entire life? But then I remembered my mother's cold voice on that. The meeting with Richard Parker exceeded my expectations. He arrived with his CFO and legal counsel, clearly taking this seriously. "I'll be direct," I said after pleasantries were exchanged. "I own 40% of Reynolds Construction, and I'm looking to sell my shares." Richard didn't even try to hide his surprise or his interest. "Family disagreement?" he asked. "Irreconcilable differences in business vision," I replied diplomatically. He nodded. "I've followed your work, Ethan. Your vision aligns much more closely with Westfield's than with Reynolds' traditional approach." The next few hours were intense. Richard's team had clearly done their homework on Reynolds Construction, asking pointed questions about our contracts, assets, and financial health. I answered everything honestly, including the challenges. By the end of the meeting, Richard made a preliminary offer, $20 million for my 40% stake. "We'll need to conduct due diligence, of course," he said. "But we can move quickly if you're ready." I looked him in the eye. "I need this done by Friday. And absolute confidentiality until then." He smiled. "Ambitious timeline, but doable. And discretion is in both our interests." The next 2 days were a blur of paperwork, meetings with attorneys, and careful planning. I continued going to work as if nothing had changed, though I was technically fired. No one approached me about clearing out my office, and I wondered if Mom had delayed telling others about my termination. Sarah and her team worked around the clock to prepare the sale documents. Tyler connected me with his investment advisor to prepare for the sudden influx of capital. Andrea helped structure the deal to minimize tax implications. Throughout it all, I maintained radio silence with my family. Mom tried calling twice more, probably wondering why I hadn't cleared out my office, but I let the calls go to voicemail. Jason texted about a client meeting, seemingly unaware that I'd been fired. By Friday afternoon, everything was ready. I met Richard and his team at Sarah's law office. The final sale price was $19.8 million, with additional performance incentives that could add another $2 million over 3 years. As I signed the final document transferring my shares to Westfield Developers, Sarah asked one last time, "Are you absolutely certain about this, Ethan?" I thought about my grandfather who built something from nothing. About my father who believed in my vision enough to ensure I had a say in the company's future. About my mother who tried to take that away with a single voicemail. "I'm certain," I said, and signed my name. Richard shook my hand firmly. "We'll announce the acquisition Monday morning. Enjoy your weekend, Ethan. You've earned it." I walked out of that office a very wealthy man, but also one without the family legacy I'd spent my life trying to honor. The mixture of liberation and loss was dizzying. That night, I turned off my phone, ordered expensive takeout to my apartment, and opened a bottle of scotch I'd been saving for a special occasion. I toasted to my grandfather, my father, and to new beginnings. I had no idea what Monday would bring, but for the first time in years, the future was entirely mine to shape. I slept better that weekend than I had in months. When Monday morning arrived, I woke up naturally before my alarm, made a proper breakfast, and enjoyed my coffee while reading the news online. At precisely 9 a.m., Westfield Developers issued their press release. Westfield Developers is pleased to announce the acquisition of a 40% stake in Reynolds Construction, marking a significant strategic partnership in the Pacific Northwest construction market. The release went on to outline Westfield's plans to leverage Reynolds' local reputation while bringing their innovative, sustainable building practices to the Portland market. It was professionally worded, but the implications were clear. Westfield now had equal decision-making power with my family in the company. I turned my phone back on, curious about the reaction. It immediately began buzzing with notifications. 72 missed calls, 43 from Jason, 21 from my mother, the rest from other family members, employees, and industry contacts. My voicemail was full. I had over 100 text messages. The first call came in while I was still scrolling through the notifications. Jason's name flashed on the screen. I declined it and continued reading the texts, which ranged from confused, "What's going on with Westfield?" to panicked, "Call me now," to threatening, "You'll regret this." My mother's texts were coldly furious. "What have you done? This is unacceptable. Our lawyer will be contacting you. Your father would be ashamed." That last one stung, but I knew it wasn't true. Dad had protected my place in the company precisely because he anticipated something like this happening. My email inbox wasn't much better. Industry publications were requesting comments. Employees were expressing confusion and concern. Clients were asking if their projects would be affected. The most interesting email came from Richard Parker. "Phone's ringing off the hook here too. Standing by our agreement to let you announce your next steps on your own timeline. Coffee later this week?" Around noon, the doorbell rang. My cousin Michael stood there, looking uncomfortable. "They sent you as the emissary?" I asked, letting him in. "Someone had to come in person since you won't answer your phone," he said, following me to the kitchen where I poured him coffee. "Ethan, what the hell? The whole family is in crisis mode." "I was fired, Michael." Via voicemail. "What did they expect?" "Not this," he said, gesturing vaguely. "They can't move forward on anything now. Major decisions require majority approval, and with Westfield holding 40%. They need Westfield to agree to everything." I finished for him. "Just like they needed me to agree before, but didn't bother consulting me." He shook his head. "The Bayside development contract is hanging by a thread. It's worth millions, and the client is spooked by the Westfield news." "That's a management problem," I said coolly. "And I'm no longer management." Michael studied me. "You don't seem upset about any of this." "I've had time to process it." "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the moment I was fired." He looked shocked. "That was only last week." "I work quickly when motivated." After Michael left, promising to relay my unwillingness to engage, I checked industry news. Reynolds Construction stock, we'd gone public with a minority stake 5 years ago while keeping family control, had dropped 15% on the news. Business analysts were speculating about what the surprise partnership meant for both companies. My phone continued ringing throughout the day. Around 3 o'clock, I finally picked up a call from Emma, the head of the sustainability team I'd built. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately. "I'm fine, Emma. How are things there?" "Chaotic. No one knows what's happening. Jason's locked in the conference room with the senior management team. Your mom left after slamming some doors. Rumors are flying." "What kind of rumors?" "That you betrayed the family. That you're going to work for Westfield. That this is some kind of hostile takeover." She paused. "There's also a rumor that you were fired last week and this is your revenge." "That last one's closest to the truth," I admitted. "I'm sorry about the uncertainty for the team." "Don't be. Most of us are just worried about you. And," she hesitated, "some are hoping Westfield might actually implement some of your green building initiatives that kept getting shot down." That made me smile. "Keep me posted, will you? I'd like to know how things develop." "Of course. Are you coming back to the office?" "I don't think that would be wise right now." After we hung up, I spent some time answering emails from industry colleagues and reassuring a few key clients that their projects wouldn't be affected. I purposely avoided contacting anyone in senior management or my family. Around 6, my building's front desk called up. "Mr. Reynolds, your brother Jason is here. He's quite insistent on seeing you." I sighed. This confrontation was inevitable. Send him up. When I opened the door, Jason looked like he hadn't slept in days, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. His eyes were red-rimmed, his tie loosened. 48 hours, he said, pushing past me into the apartment. It took you 48 hours to destroy a 60-year family legacy. Hello to you too, I replied, closing the door. Drink? Are you seriously offering me a drink right now? Do you have any idea what you've done? I poured myself a whiskey and sat down. I sold my shares to a qualified buyer, as was my right after being wrongfully terminated. This isn't about legal rights, he shouted. This is about family. Exactly, I said quietly. This is about family. The family that fired me via voicemail. Jason ran his hands through his hair. You have to undo this. Buy back the shares. Whatever it takes. That's not possible. The deal is done. Ethan, please. His voice cracked, and to my shock, I saw tears in his eyes. We'll lose everything. 2 days later, Jason arrived precisely on time, looking marginally better than during his apartment visit but still strained. He'd brought a thick folder of documents, which he placed on the table before sitting down. Thank you for meeting me, he said stiffly. Seem better than more unannounced visits, I replied. How's Mom? How do you think? Her blood pressure's through the roof. Dr. Stevens wanted to admit her to the hospital, but she refused. I felt a twinge of guilt, which I quickly suppressed. I'm sorry to hear that. But her health issues aren't my responsibility. No? Jason's voice rose slightly. None of this is your responsibility? Not the company teetering on the edge, not the employees worried about their jobs, not the family name being dragged through industry gossip. The waiter approached, sensing tension. Can I get you gentlemen something to drink? Scotch, neat, Jason said. Make it a double. After the waiter left, I leaned forward. Let's be clear about something. I didn't create this situation. I responded to it. There's a difference. By selling to our biggest competitor? That was your response? My response to being fired from my own company, yes. What did you expect me to do? Jason looked genuinely confused. It wasn't a real firing, Ethan. It was a negotiation tactic. I stared at him. A negotiation tactic? The lawyer was going to offer to buy your shares, Jason explained, lowering his voice as the waiter returned with his drink. We were going to offer $7 million for your 40%. I nearly choked. $7 million? My shares were worth nearly $20 million, Jason. You were trying to cheat me. He had the decency to look embarrassed. It was Mom's idea. She thought you'd be desperate to keep family peace and would accept without getting an independent valuation. So you were planning to rip me off and force me out, I summarized. That actually makes this worse, not better. Jason downed half his scotch in one gulp. We were wrong. Clearly. But this response is disproportionate. Do you realize what you've done? Westfield can block every major decision now. We're paralyzed. That sounds like a management problem, I said, repeating what I told Michael. Damn it, Ethan! Jason slammed his hand on the table, causing nearby diners to look over. Lowering his voice again, he continued, We're facing a crisis. The Bayside contract requires a decision by Friday, and Westfield is stalling. Why would they be stalling? Because they want concessions. They want us to implement their systems, their vendors. They're using this as leverage to basically take over without purchasing controlling interest. I leaned back. Sounds like smart business. Jason looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Whose side are you on? I'm not on any side anymore. That's the point. The waiter returned to take our food order. Jason waved him away, saying we needed more time. After he left, Jason opened the folder he'd brought. Look at these projections, he said, pushing papers toward me. If we lose Bayside, we'll have to lay off at least 30 people by the end of the quarter. These people have families, mortgages. I reviewed the documents, surprised by what I saw. These numbers don't match what was presented at the last board meeting. Jason looked away. Mom didn't want to cause panic. So you lied about the company's financial position? To the board? That's securities fraud, Jason. It was temporary, he protested. We were going to stabilize with the Bayside contract, which required my department. That was Mom's doing too, Jason admitted. But they weren't. I showed you the projections. I know. He looked miserable. I've always known you were right about the direction of the industry. I couldn't stand up to her. I felt a complex mix of vindication and disappointment. So you let her push me out instead. I didn't know she was going to fire you. She told me she was going to offer you a different position, heading up a smaller division. You still didn't warn me. I was going to, but then you sold your shares before I could even process what had happened. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me. Why did she hate my ideas so much? It wasn't just about costs, was it? Jason sighed deeply. She thought Dad was wrong about you. That giving you 40% was his illness talking, not his business sense. Every time one of your projects succeeded, it was like a personal affront to her judgment. And you? What did you think? He looked me in the eye for the first time. I thought he was right. You see where the industry is going in ways neither of us do. But I was too weak to say it. The waiter returned, and this time we ordered more to give ourselves a moment to regroup than out of hunger. Even if I wanted to help, I said after the waiter left, the sale is final. I can't just ask for my shares back. What if we matched Westfield's offer? Jason asked desperately. 20 million. We'd have to take on debt, but if it saves the company. It's not about the money, Jason. It never was. It was about respect. Recognition. Being valued for my contributions instead of constantly fighting to be heard. I understand that now, he said quickly. Things would be different. Equal partnership, real input on decisions. Easy to say when you're Ethan, please. His voice cracked again. I'm begging you. Help us find a way out of this. Looking at my brother, really looking at him, I saw past the polished executive to the boy who taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped me with math homework, who'd been my ally before he became my rival. There was genuine anguish in his eyes. I'll think about it, I said finally. I can't promise anything, but I'll consider whether there's a path forward that makes sense. Relief washed over his face. That's all I'm asking. Just help us find a solution. As our food arrived, I wondered if there actually was a solution that could satisfy everyone, or if some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. The following morning, I met Richard Parker at Westfield's temporary Portland office, a sleek space in a downtown high-rise that contrasted sharply with Reynolds Construction's more traditional headquarters. You've caused quite the stir, Richard said, gesturing for me to take a seat in his corner office with views of Mount Hood in the distance. Your family is persistent. Your brother has called me 6 times. I imagine he has, I replied. They're in a difficult position. What of their own making? Richard pointed out. But I didn't buy into Reynolds to destroy it. I bought in because I see its potential, particularly the potential you were developing. He slid a folder across his desk. This is our proposal for a new division focused exclusively on sustainable construction, with you at the helm. Executive Vice President title, competitive compensation package, full creative control. I skimmed the documents, impressed by the offer. The salary alone was double what I'd made at Reynolds, with substantial bonuses tied to performance metrics. This is very generous, I acknowledged. It's self-interested, Richard corrected. Your vision aligns with where Westfield wants to go. The fact that we get to poach you from Reynolds is just a bonus. I closed the folder. What about the Bayside contract? Jason says you're blocking it. Richard's expression turned calculating. We have concerns about how it would be executed without your involvement. The client specifically requested your team's approach to energy efficiency. And if I were involved? That would change the equation considerably. I nodded, things becoming clearer. You're using it as leverage. Business is business, he said unapologetically. We invested $20 million for influence. We're exercising it. After leaving Richard's office, I drove to my parents' house, a sprawling craftsman in Portland Heights that had been in the family since my grandfather's day. I hadn't called ahead, knowing Mom might refuse to see me. The housekeeper, Maria, looked surprised when she opened the door. Mr. Ethan! Your mother didn't say you were coming. She doesn't know, I admitted. Is she home? Maria nodded, looking uncomfortable. In the sunroom. Shall I tell her you're here? No need. I know the way. I found my mother exactly where I expected, sitting in her favorite wicker chair with reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewing documents. At 72, Margaret Reynolds was still a formidable presence, silver hair always perfectly styled, posture rigid, expression vigilant. She looked up as I entered, her face immediately hardening. You have some nerve coming here. Hello to you too, Mom, I said, taking a seat across from her without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. My lawyer will handle all communications going forward. That's not going to work. Westfield is blocking the Bayside contract. A flash of, actually it is. Richard Parker wants me to head Westfield's new sustainable construction division. If I accept, the Bayside problem goes away. If I don't, I let the implication hang. So you're here to gloat, she said bitterly. To rub our noses in the mess you've created. I didn't create this mess. You did, when you decided to fire me from my own company. You were undermining everything we built. She suddenly exploded, color rising in her cheeks. Pushing your expensive green initiatives, charming clients away from Jason, acting like you knew better than people with decades more experience. My expensive initiatives won us contracts and industry recognition, I countered. And I never undermined Jason. I complemented his strengths with mine exactly as Dad intended. Your father wasn't thinking clearly when he made that ridiculous ownership arrangement. He was thinking perfectly clearly. He saw that the industry was changing, and Reynolds needed to change with it. You're the one who couldn't see it or couldn't accept it. She set her papers aside, fixing me with the stern look that had intimidated me as a child. I built that company alongside your father for 45 years. I kept the books when we could barely make payroll. I secured financing when banks laughed at our expansion plans. Don't you dare tell me what Reynolds Construction needs. Then why is the company in financial trouble? I asked quietly. Why did you lie to the board about the numbers? Why is Bayside so critical that you're desperate enough to talk to me after swearing you never would again? Her expression faltered. Who told you about the financials? Jason. He showed me the real projections yesterday. She looked away, toward the garden outside. For the first time, I noticed how tired she looked, how the years seemed to weigh on her more heavily than before. We overextended on the Miller project, she admitted reluctantly. Cost overruns, permit delays. We had to finance the completion ourselves to avoid penalties. It drained our reserves. The Miller project that you insisted on handling traditionally, despite my warnings about the soil remediation costs. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Mom, the world is changing. Construction is changing. Fighting against sustainable practices isn't just wrong environmentally, it's bad business. The clients want it. The market demands it. You can't stop progress by ignoring it. And you think Westfield is the answer? She asked sharply. Letting our biggest competitor dictate terms? I think we need to find a compromise before Reynolds Construction implodes, I said. I've been thinking about a potential solution, but it would require everyone to swallow their pride a bit. She raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. 2 days later, we convened an emergency board meeting at Reynolds headquarters. Every senior manager was present, along with Richard Parker and 2 Westfield executives. The tension in the room was palpable as Jason called the meeting to order. As you all know, we're facing unprecedented challenges following recent ownership changes. Jason began diplomatically. Today, we're discussing a proposed restructuring that could provide a path forward. He nodded to me, and I stood up, feeling all eyes in the room on me. Some held resentment, others curiosity, a few even showed hope. The proposal before you represents a compromise, I began. Westfield would maintain their 40% ownership but agree to a modified voting structure for operational decisions. Reynolds family members would retain day-to-day management control, while major strategic initiatives would require supermajority approval. I clicked to the next slide in my presentation. In exchange, Reynolds Construction would create a new joint venture with Westfield Horizon Sustainable Development specializing in eco-friendly construction projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. The JV would be equally owned by both companies but would operate independently. Richard Parker spoke up. Westfield is prepared to invest an additional $10 million in startup capital for Horizon, contingent on Ethan Reynolds serving as CEO of the new entity. Murmurs spread through the room. I continued. This structure allows both companies to maintain their core identities while collaborating in the growing sustainable construction market. Reynolds keeps its family legacy intact. Westfield gains the foothold in Portland they've wanted. My mother, sitting silently at the end of the table, finally spoke. And the Bayside contract? Richard nodded. Would proceed immediately under current terms, with input from our joint technical team to enhance the sustainability features. For the next hour, we fielded questions about the proposed structure, financial implications, staffing concerns, brand positioning. Through it all, I could see the room gradually warming to the idea, a solution that allowed everyone to save face while potentially creating something better than what existed before. When all questions had been answered, Jason called for a preliminary vote to pursue the restructuring plan. It passed unanimously except for one abstention, my mother. As the meeting adjourned, people filed out discussing the details animatedly. Mom remained seated, staring at the proposal documents. I approached her cautiously. It's a good solution, I said. Reynolds stays in family hands. The financial pressure eases. We get to build something new. You get everything you wanted, she observed. Not everything. But enough. I paused. Your abstention, does that mean you'll block this when it comes to final vote? She looked up at me, her expression complex. I abstained because I needed time to think. To consider whether I can trust this arrangement. She closed the folder. To consider whether I can trust you. I've never given you reason not to, I said quietly. Even now, I could have let Reynolds flounder. Instead, I'm trying to save it just in a new form. Like your father would have wanted, she said, almost to herself. Yes. Exactly like that. She stood, gathering her things. As she reached the door, she turned back. The sustainability projects. They really are the future, aren't they? I nodded. They are. And they're profitable too, if done right. Something shifted in her expression, not quite acceptance, not quite respect, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Tomorrow, then, she said, and left me alone in the conference room. 6 months is both a long time, and no time at all in the construction business. Projects that were in planning during the ownership crisis were now taking physical shape. The Bayside development had broken ground with considerable fanfare, featuring many of the sustainable elements I'd originally proposed, now enhanced by Westfield's technical expertise. Horizon Sustainable Development had moved into its own offices, a renovated warehouse in Portland's Pearl District that we'd retrofitted as a showcase of green building technologies. Solar panels provided 60% of our electricity. A rainwater reclamation system handled all our irrigation needs. The interior featured reclaimed materials and non-toxic finishes throughout. Most importantly, we had contracts. Big ones. Clients who had been hesitant about eco-friendly construction were now approaching us, impressed by the Westfield Reynolds partnership and the proof of concept our office provided. I stood by the windows of my new corner office, watching our team of 30 employees, some from Reynolds, some from Westfield, many new hires collaborating in the open workspace. Energy and purpose filled the air. This was what I'd always envisioned, not just sustainable buildings, but a sustainable business model. A knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. Jason stood there, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. "The quarterly numbers are in," he said, handing me a folder. "Thought you'd want to see them right away." I scanned the financial statements. "We're 15% above projections. And Reynolds proper is up 7% since the restructuring," he added with evident satisfaction. "Turns out having a sister company specializing in green building actually drives traditional clients to us too. They like knowing we have the capability, even if they don't fully utilize it." "Mom must be pleased," I said, setting the folder on my desk. Jason's expression grew more measured. "In her way. She still won't fully admit you were right, but she did mention yesterday that Dad would be proud of how things turned out." Coming from Margaret Reynolds, that was practically a standing ovation. The path to this moment hadn't been smooth. The final agreement had required weeks of negotiation, with my mother challenging every clause as if determined to find hidden traps. Richard had grown impatient at times, but I'd managed to keep both sides at the table. The Reynolds family dynamic had shifted too. Jason and I spoke almost daily now, coordinating between our companies with a collaborative spirit we hadn't shared since childhood. My relationship with Mom remained complicated, formal during board meetings, cautiously personal during family gatherings, but the open hostility had faded. "Are you coming to dinner Sunday?" Jason asked. "Emma's making her famous lasagna, and the kids have been asking about Uncle Ethan." "Wouldn't miss it," I promised. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard Parker. "Singapore investors very interested in Horizon model for Asian expansion. Discussion next week?" I smiled as I responded affirmatively. 6 months ago, I'd been fighting for scraps of influence in my family business. Now, I was helping shape the future of construction across multiple markets. The irony wasn't lost on me. Being pushed out of Reynolds had been painful, humiliating even. But that voicemail from my mother had ultimately forced me to stand up for myself in ways I might never have otherwise. Sometimes being shown the door is exactly the push you need to find or build the right room. As I gathered my things to leave for the day, I passed by our company mission statement mounted on the wall. "Building tomorrow's world with today's resources." It had been my father's favorite saying, though the company had drifted from its meaning over the years. Now, it felt like we were truly honoring his vision again. I thought about the lessons of the past year, about knowing your worth, about standing your ground, about finding the balance between principle and reconciliation. Most of all, I'd learned that sometimes the most difficult people in your life can inadvertently push you toward your greatest opportunities. That evening, as I walked through our office, employees were gathered around a table of cupcakes, celebrating a teammate's birthday. They waved me over, insisting I join them. Standing there, surrounded by this team we'd built from the fragments of corporate conflict, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years at Reynolds Construction: belonging. I'd lost a family business but gained something more valuable, a business that felt like family, built on shared values rather than obligatory blood ties. And that, as it turned out, made all the difference. What about you? Have you ever had to stand your ground with family or walk away from something comfortable to build something better? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you found something valuable in my experience, subscribe for more real-life business stories, and share with someone who might be struggling with similar family or workplace dynamics. Remember, sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most rewarding outcomes. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage in your own difficult moments.